Hello folks, my name is Dr. Zachariah Hildenbrand. I'm here with my colleague Dr. Kevin Shug, and we are the Collaborative Laboratories for Environmental Analysis and Remediation at the University of Texas at Arlington. We're coming to you from the Responsible Shale Energy Extraction Conference, which is a very unique event bringing together scientists, concerned citizens, operators, regulators, and technology companies to have an honest series of conversations about environmental stewardship in shale energy.
We'd really like to thank the support of the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation and Earth Day Texas for allowing us to put on this event. We believe that this content that we're going to be providing to those who haven't been able to attend is going to help answer and educate a lot of questions surrounding responsible shale energy extraction. So we hope you enjoy the content.
This next presentation by Dusty Horwitt, he is the Senior Counsel with Partnership for Policy Integrity, is incredibly important. We're going to be talking about chemical disclosures within unconventional oil and gas development. This is a particularly contentious issue given that when folks have concerns about whether this is affecting their groundwater, they are not privy to the information of what is actually going underneath the ground. Dusty and his team has worked on this extensively and has really pioneered this field, and he's going to bless us by telling us a little bit about his work and where we're heading into the future. So let's give him a round of applause.
Thanks so much, Zach. So a little known fact about the regulation of oil and gas drilling and hydraulic fracturing is that for 4 decades, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency has been reviewing and regulating new chemicals proposed for use in drilling and fracking to protect our health and the environment. Now, how many people think that if during the course of these reviews, if the EPA found health concerns about these chemicals, that they would take at least one of 5 actions? They would either prohibit the use of these chemicals, they would order testing, health testing, to get a better idea of what the health effects of these chemicals might be. They would track where these chemicals were used. They would test for the chemicals in the environment to try to determine whether people were being exposed. Or, at the very least, EPA would make it very easy for citizens to find out ourselves where these chemicals were being used, so we could ask for health testing or testing for the chemicals in the environment or take other steps to protect ourselves. How many people think EPA would take at least one of those steps if they found health concerns about these chemicals? Okay. A couple people. Other people maybe are more skeptical of the agency. I'm going to leave you in suspense just for a couple minutes while I welcome you to the very surprising world of federal regulation of new chemicals used in drilling and hydraulic fracturing. And it's surprising because over the years, the oil and gas industry has won exemptions under most federal environmental laws. Safe Drinking Water Act, Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, hazardous waste laws, the list goes on. And so there are not many things that EPA can do to regulate the industry, but this is one of them. They can regulate and have regulated new chemicals proposed for use in drilling and fracking. And I wanted to share the results of our 3-year investigation into this program that we think sheds some light on the state of disclosure of chemicals used in fracking and the risks that communities face from drilling and fracking. So as Zach mentioned, I work for Partnership for Policy Integrity. We're a nonprofit organization that uses science and strategic communications to advance sound energy policy. And we work on fracking, and we also work on bioenergy. That's our other issue. I did just want to say just briefly, we are a little bit skeptical of England's switch from coal into other forms of energy, because a lot of that switch has gone into bioenergy, which involves burning forest wood sourced from the U.S. and shipped to England. And in our view, and in the view of others, burning wood for electricity is actually worse for the climate than burning coal. So we hope that the UK can choose some better options than that in the future. So I realized how serious the risks of drilling and fracking could be about 8 years ago, when I was invited to testify before the New York City Council. The council was concerned that drilling and fracking for shale gas in upstate New York, near where New York City's drinking water supply reservoirs are located, could contaminate the city's drinking water. So they called a number of us to testify. There were about 200 people in this hearing room, and in the middle of this hearing, one of the New York City Council members said in his thick New York accent, "The purity of New York City's drinking water is absolutely critical to the great taste of our bagels and pizza." And so I laughed, and I looked around the hearing room. No one was laughing. This was very, very serious for New York City, and not just because of the bagels and pizza. The state later estimated that if New York City's drinking water were contaminated, it would cost at least $8 billion to build a water filtration plant for New York City's unfiltered water supply, plus an additional $200 million a year to operate that plant. So because of that concern and others, as many know, New York State in 2014 banned shale gas drilling in New York. And perhaps the major concern in that debate around the drinking water in New York City and throughout the state was concern about the chemicals used in fracking. And that's been probably the biggest concern here in Texas and across the country. There are certainly other environmental risks that we've talked about at this conference, but no issue has captured the public's imagination and concern like the chemicals used in the fracking process. And the concerns are basically that, I think Zach spoke about these yesterday, that the chemicals could migrate underground when they're injected into the well, into groundwater. They could spill above ground, leach into groundwater, run off into surface water. They could spill during transport to the well sites, or they could come back up out of the well in the wastewater, and then when the wastewater is either spilled or disposed of, there could be water contamination. So we were very interested, given this concern about fracking chemicals, when we learned a few years ago that EPA has been regulating these chemicals and drilling chemicals used in the drilling phase of oil and gas extraction for about 40 years. They've been doing this under the Toxic Substances Control Act, which is a federal law passed and enacted in 1976 that is designed to protect all of us in the environment from chemical risks. The act applies both to existing chemicals that were in commerce at or around the time TSCA was enacted, and also to new chemicals that are proposed for use in drilling, fracking, and in other sectors. So if any of us wanted to manufacture a new chemical in the United States, we would generally have to submit an application to EPA, telling EPA the name of our chemical, giving them the structure of our chemical, and other information that we might have so that EPA could assess that chemical for health risks, environmental risks, and then decide how to regulate that chemical, anywhere from banning it to allowing it to be used without any regulation, and then anything in between, ordering protections for workers, maximum concentrations in drinking water, things like that. So we submitted a Freedom of Information request to EPA in 2014, and over the past 3 years, we've received a flow of records from EPA. It's been fairly slow because the agency is understaffed and they have to redact some information from these records withheld as confidential by chemical manufacturers. We now have obtained records on 127 chemicals used in or proposed for use in drilling and hydraulic fracturing. We issued a report last year called Toxic Secrets about 105 of those chemicals. And so I want to share some of our findings and show you what some of these records look like so you can see what we've seen. One of the surprises is that EPA had health concerns about almost all of these chemicals. They had some sort of health concern about 88 of the 105 chemicals that we saw last year, ranging from irritation to skin, eyes, lungs, mucous membranes, to neurotoxicity, blood toxicity, liver toxicity, and developmental toxicity. And yet, despite having these health concerns, EPA allowed almost all of these chemicals to be manufactured and used commercially without asking for or receiving health testing on these chemicals from the chemical manufacturers. And this practice of EPA has been criticized publicly by Congress's investigative arm, the Government Accountability Office. They have put EPA on their list of federal government agencies at high, or this program, the New Chemicals Program, on the list of federal government programs at highest risk for waste, fraud, abuse, and mismanagement. So this is officially not a good practice to review these chemicals without health testing data, but that's what EPA does. We found that in only 12 cases did companies say that they gave EPA health testing data, and in 10 of those cases we didn't find that data in the record, either because it was confidential or just missing. And in only 5 cases did EPA ask for health testing data. And in at least one of those cases, we don't think EPA asked for the right kind of test, which I'll show in a minute. EPA, the companies do not have to give EPA health testing data, and EPA can ask for it, but they generally don't. So let's take a look at a couple of these records. This record, EPA has assigned a number. You can see it up top, it's P-120072. The P means pre-manufacture notice. That's the type of notice companies have to give to EPA when they want to manufacture a new chemical. The 12 means it was the 12th notice, the 12 means it was in fiscal year 2012, and the 72 means it was the 72nd notice in fiscal year 2012. So this chemical, you can see a little bit further down the document, under health there, it says that EPA is concerned based on the analog, and then there's a redacted box there, and that means that EPA is using an analogous chemical to determine health effects. Because they don't have health testing data, what they typically do is they search the scientific literature for data for chemicals with similar chemical structures. And they look at the health effects associated with those chemicals, and then they extrapolate and they say if this chemical has a similar structure, has these health effects, then this new chemical proposed for use probably has similar health effects. So the health effects here that they're concerned about are developmental toxicity, kidney toxicity, blood toxicity, and liver toxicity. So those are some significant concerns. Then you go further down the document, in the regulatory decision section, and that first line says that this chemical will be dropped from further review. And that means EPA is done with the oversight, the chemical can be manufactured, and at the very bottom of the paragraph it says no human health exposure-based testing was desired. So they're not going to have any health testing of this chemical, and it goes out into the world. Now, you might be interested to know that we found this chemical was used in Texas. There at the bottom, we found it was used in a total of 38 oil and gas wells, including in Texas in Dawson, Glasscock, Martin, Midland, and Upton counties. One other example here, this number is P090085. EPA is concerned about this one. It says there is concern for neurotoxicity based on, and then something is redacted here. In this case, in the regulatory section, EPA does ask for health testing. You can see there are a number of health tests they ask for, like combined repeated dose toxicity study and others. We checked with a medical doctor and toxicologist based in Denver, Daniel Teitelbaum, who has analyzed health effects from the oil and gas industry for decades. He looked at these health tests and he said, none of these will shed any light on neurotoxicity. So EPA doesn't here appear to be asking for health tests that are relevant to the health concern that the agency had. This chemical was used in 19 wells in Texas, in Brazos, Burleson, and Millen counties. Now you might ask, why does EPA let these chemicals out into the world if they have health concerns without health testing? We're not sure. We asked the agency and they declined to answer our questions. But one of the reasons might be because EPA generally assumes that these chemicals never leak, spill, migrate to the ground, or are otherwise accidentally released, which flies in the face of evidence compiled by EPA itself, in addition to other evidence, including disclosures from oil and gas companies. And so if that's EPA's general assumption, then they may assume that exposure to these chemicals is going to be very low because the only releases of these chemicals are basically purposeful when the company goes to dispose the chemicals under controlled situations. Another question is, well, how can people find where these chemicals are used? And the answer is not easily. EPA does not track where these chemicals are used. EPA doesn't test for them in the environment. And EPA does not make it easy for people to find them because companies can withhold almost any piece of information about these chemicals as confidential. They can withhold the CAS number, which is Chemical Abstract Service Number, a unique chemical, a numeric identifier assigned to each chemical. They can withhold the chemical specific name, its trade name, For example, one of these chemicals that I showed was called Trade Safe, or Clay Safe EF, that's its trade name. But companies can withhold that, and they often do. And so the only realistic way to find these chemicals is to search in fracking chemical disclosure databases. And there are two prominent ones. One is FracFocus, which is run by the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact and Groundwater Protection Council. It covers more than 117,000 wells, fracking chemical disclosure for 117,000 wells in 23 states. And the other is California's database, which covers more than 1,500 wells just in the state of California. FracFocus has been running since 2011. California's has been running since 2015. So we took a set of these chemicals, 41 chemicals, for which EPA found some sort of health concern, and chemicals that we know were manufactured or were likely manufactured. We know that the chemicals are manufactured in some cases because companies have to give EPA what's called a notice of commencement, saying we are going to produce this chemical commercially. And they have to do that for higher volume chemicals. And then for lower volume chemicals, companies do not have to give EPA a notice of commencement, but it's likely that those chemicals are used because the purpose of making them in small volumes is to get them out into the world to see how they operate. And we also know that in some cases, some of those chemicals have been used in oil and gas wells. So we searched for 41 chemicals in FracFocus and in California's database. We found wells in which only 2 of those chemicals were used. 39 of the chemicals, we don't know where they were used. And in one of the chemicals that we couldn't find is this one, P090205. This was reviewed in fiscal year 2009. EPA said that they had concerns, health concerns here, and they had health concerns. One of which was neurotoxicity for the quaternary in the second to last line, and then developmental toxicity and liver effects in the last line were their other health concerns. EPA dropped this chemical from review, meaning they allowed it to be manufactured, and then we can't find it. Here is the notice submitted by the manufacturer, and you can see on this page, this is the page where the company would otherwise put its company name, and there's an X in the box over on the far right-hand side. It's confidential. The name of the company is confidential. On this page, the company is supposed to put the name of the chemical and the chemical abstract service number. You see the X's over there under the confidential box. That's confidential. On this page, the company can put the trade name of the chemical. That's confidential. And so instead, they list a generic name, which they have to list when they withhold the trade name, or the specific chemical name is confidential. And so that's what we had to search for. We could only search for the generic name of this chemical. FracFocus says on its website that the very best way to search for these chemicals is by CAS number, chemical abstract service number, because it's a unique identifier for each chemical. Whereas the name or even the trade name of the chemical can be expressed in different ways. So if we are searching for a trade name or the name of a chemical that we find in one of these EPA records, it could be listed in FracFocus or in California's database, but it could be under a different name. Whereas if we had the CAS number, then we would be searching apples to apples in these records. It's also possible that we couldn't find these chemicals because state law that requires fracking chemical disclosure typically allows companies to withhold chemical identity information as confidential. So we could have information from these EPA records, but when we search for that name or even CAS number in the FracFocus or California databases, the companies could have withheld the name or CAS number in those databases. So there are a number of reasons that we might not have found these, but at the very least, we feel that if EPA is going to have health concerns about these chemicals and the chemicals are being put out into the world, EPA should tell us especially what the CAS number is. And for none of these 41 chemicals was the CAS number available. It was withheld as confidential. So when you look at this program and you see that EPA has health concerns about most of the chemicals that it's reviewed, at least the records we've seen so far, and EPA said there are about 400 more records that we haven't seen yet. When they have health concerns about most of the chemicals, they let them be manufactured with no health testing, There's no tracking of the chemicals, there's no testing for the environment of the chemicals are shrouded in confidentiality claims, and it's very difficult to find them. You can understand why this does not give us a lot of confidence in EPA's oversight, or that these operations can be conducted, drilling and fracking operations can be conducted safely. And if this type of regulatory oversight continues, more communities are going to act to protect their bagels, their pizza, and their health. Thank you. I'm happy to answer your question.
Absolutely fantastic presentation. Thank you very much. A couple of questions here. We may not be able to get through all of them. You got another one there, Doug? Okay, thank you, sir. From your perspective, do you think it would be possible for some new policy that this proprietary information be provided to the governmental agencies under an NDA? Do you think that type of policy would hold up?
My understanding is that that's basically already the case. And I'm sorry if I didn't make this clear. When you see the confidentiality claims in these documents, that's what the public can see. But EPA does get to see the names of the chemicals, the chemical abstract service numbers, the trade names. They get to see all that information. As some people may know, the Toxic Substances Control Act was recently reformed by Congress just last year and signed into law by President Obama. And one of the provisions of that law is that the universe of folks who can see the confidential information has expanded from only federal officials to state, tribal officials, and in some cases, health professionals. But they have to keep that information confidential. They can't release it to the public.
Thank you. What are the relative considerations of toxicity versus performance versus proprietary nature when chemical manufacturers seek the development and the approval of a new compound for shale extraction?
Sorry, can you just repeat that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What are the relative considerations of toxicity versus performance versus proprietary nature when chemical manufacturers are seeking the development and the approval of a new compound for shale extraction? So essentially, when they're trying to make a new proprietary compound for shale exploration, how many of these things are they considering?
I think that would be a question best posed to them, but I do know that there is an EPA program that rewards manufacturers for producing chemicals that are less environmentally harmful. We have not analyzed the efficacy of that program, and I think it would be difficult for us to do that because a lot of this information, even in that particular section of these forms, is confidential. But I think that question would be best addressed to the manufacturers.
Okay. Should these health effect investigations be reviewed by an industry-specific toxicologist, or could any reputable toxicologist understand the effects?
Well, I think disclosure would be the key. I mean, you have to see what kind of studies were done, and right now, no one can really see that information except for the manufacturers or EPA regulators, if that information is even made available to EPA. So I think it would be a question of first making sure that those studies are conducted.
Okay. And one important thing to note when we're talking about chemical disclosures from our perspective as scientists, when we're trying to investigate the relative impacts of unconventional oil and gas development on groundwater quality in particular, and we're looking for these chemicals and you don't know what they are, it's much akin to looking for a needle in a haystack, so to speak. So therein lies the value of these disclosures. Last question, and again, the questions that we do not get to, we will address subsequently. On these databases like Frac Focus, do we have access to the concentration and volume information of these chemicals that are used per well?
Sometimes. Sometimes it is available, sometimes it's not. And I have not done a study as to how often it is or how often it isn't, but I do know that at least some state legal regimes do require companies to disclose the concentration of their chemicals. I'm pretty sure that the Texas rules say that concentration can be withheld as confidential. I don't know how often that happens, but I think it varies.
Okay, thank you very much. We have one more question. Oh, are there any oh no, sorry, I thought that said citizens. That would have been a different question. Are there any chemicals being health tested that you know of right now? Close enough, okay.
The short answer is no. The longer answer is these records, so we filed this Freedom of Information request in 2014. And so all the records that we're receiving are from 2014 or earlier. So, so we're a little bit behind in terms of the most current crop of chemicals. I'm not sure exactly which of these chemicals, if any, are still moving through EPA's regulatory process. But in general, there's not a lot of health testing, and we feel that there should be.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let's give one round of